Road to recovery. That's the main topic of this year's conference after a zero kind of year.
Indeed.
So in this situation, which is still not post-crisis or post-pandemic, what is your take on the road to recovery? Do you see the end, the light in the end of the tunnel, and in what shades is that light?
Sure. Well, as you say, we're not quite at the end of the pandemic. I don't think we'll ever be end of the pandemic permanently. I think COVID is something that we will live with going forward, so we have to look at everything on that basis. But just in terms of what APG sees, certainly with our own sales revenues, in terms of what we see our airline clients mainly enjoying, is certainly some steady and permanent growth starting probably within the last 2 to 3 months has been quite significant. Obviously, with a lot of the world's population being double vaccinated now, a lot of the major markets are opening up to international tourism. Of course, there's a long way to go with that, and some major markets like China, for example, which is a huge driver of international aviation, may not even open up until next spring. So we just have to wait for that to happen to see a real return to growth. So notwithstanding any major issues in terms of the COVID and new variants, of course, I think we're now starting to see some start of a strong growth recovery, and hopefully that will be the case.
What was the impact on the network during the past few years? Obviously, it was disastrous at the beginning, but some lessons learned. How are you now planning to move forward and have new opportunities opened up? Because as history teaches us, when a disaster strikes and where there is a crisis, there are always new opportunities opening up.
Indeed, yes. So in terms of the APG network, we've managed to be quite resilient through the pandemic period. We've actually managed to add new offices during that period. I think it's with partners looking for new opportunities for the future as things return. We've also significantly grown our cargo network. We've doubled that within the last 2 years. Obviously, cargo has been a main driver of the revenues that airlines have been able to achieve over the last 2 years. So that's been very positive. It's also accelerated a lot of the projects that we had on board for reducing distribution costs for airlines, which will be very critical. We have an APG platform, which is a booking system for airlines and travel agents. It's based on new NDC capability brought in by IATA, and that will allow airlines to enjoy some reducing costs in terms of distribution. So with a probably even more than ever focus on reducing costs, these kind of projects will start to come to the fore. And we've also been able to sign a number of new airlines for that and many of our other projects, particularly as airlines look to perhaps outsource and simplify their cost bases. So again, that's something that really plays into what APG has to offer for airlines.
So you're talking about reducing costs. Obviously, airlines have burned through a lot of cash during the crisis. At the same time, governments have poured in a lot of money into certain carriers, not everyone. Well, except for the ultra low-cost carriers, which had a huge amount of cash, resources and reserves.
Sure.
But at the same time, while reducing costs for the airlines, it seems that the cost in terms of fees and fares is rising up for the passengers. So how is this going to be in the near future, and how it will change the landscape of the market for the passengers on one hand, because they are the most important, and for the airlines on the other?
Yeah. So I think what we're seeing at the moment on those routes that are largely opening up is that there is a lot of fare inflation, as you rightly say, going on. We don't really foresee that being a permanent fixture. I believe that as the capacity starts to return, as the competitivity comes back into the marketplace, those fares will certainly stabilise. Obviously, there's an additional cost burden to travellers in a lot of areas of the world with additional testing and paperwork and other requirements. That will go away, I'm sure, but it's here at the moment. So in the same way that cargo values increased 10 times virtually on some routes, we're seeing that with passenger fares as they return as well. We have to be aware that probably there was too much of a rush to the lowest fare for many airlines in many areas of the world.
Yeah,
so
like in the past, pre-pandemic. Yeah.
Indeed. So I think if there is something to be learned from this, it's perhaps to try and stabilise that rush to the lowest fare, to try and compete for your passenger in a different way, more of a customer service orientated way, and then hopefully that will improve the balance sheets of the airlines, allow them to obviously return a lot of this government borrowing, which will be a burden for the longer term if not, and hopefully we'll have a sort of more stabilised financial industry at the end of this.
Last but not least, you already mentioned cargo. Cargo was obviously the shining star of the crisis. When nobody was flying, there were only cargo aircraft in the air. But now it seems that with the return of the passenger traffic, the cargo hold capacity is now getting back. And do you see a longer trend of cargo demand rising, and at the same time fleets expanding in terms of new and converted cargo aircraft?
Yeah, sure. So yes, definitely cargo has been the saviour in part to a lot of airlines, and obviously you've seen a lot of airlines convert their passenger aircraft to putting boxes in the passenger cabins. But again, it's really been a quick fix, because ultimately around 70% of the world's air cargo flies on passenger aircraft. So taking all of that out of the equation has meant that yes, cargo rates have increased, but trying to get hold of that capacity has been very difficult. So you've also seen increases in terms of shipping costs and everything else. Time will tell, obviously, as always, with cargo, but I think it's certainly shown airlines that cargo is perhaps more important than they've perhaps given it in the past. It's typically been, to a degree for some airlines, a secondary part of their revenue, maybe only 5% of the income. But I think now it's really shown that it's a much more important element, and maybe something that they should focus on more in the future.
When a disaster strikes, obviously everybody's going into alarm mode. But what was the single most important and ultimate lesson learned by the airline industry from that crisis, and will it be there to stay?
Well, it's very difficult to say, and I have a panel tomorrow on that very question as to what lessons have we learned, and we'll be looking at different areas of the industry, from both the airlines, the airports as well, obviously have been heavily impacted, safety organisations as well. So I think the lessons that have been learned some will be very different to each sector of the industry. Some will be important to all of us. But I think ultimately it's quite probable that some of these lessons are not yet apparent to us.
Yeah.
And I think we'll start to realise what those lessons learned and pull those into best practice as we go forward.
And maybe never underestimate the power of surprise that nature can bring you.
I think if there's one lesson, I think that is it. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Very nice to you.
Thank you.